Once you understand this, you'll stop working past 58. There is a man. He is 61 years old. He wakes up at 5:47 every morning. Not because he wants to. Because he has to. He drives 40 minutes to a job he has performed for 23 years. He sits at a desk that has his name on a placard. A placard that has always felt less like recognition and more like a marker. A way of saying, this is where you belong. This is your assigned position. Do not wander. He has a pension. He has a retirement account. He has a mortgage with 11 years remaining. And on the morning I want you to picture, he sits in the parking lot of his workplace for 4 minutes before going inside. 4 minutes in which he does not check his phone. Does not listen to the radio. He just sits. Because somewhere beneath the years of motion, beneath the accumulated performance of being a reliable, responsible man who shows up and delivers and never causes problems, there is a voice. A quiet voice. Almost inaudible at this point. That says, this was not what I agreed to. Before you decide that this story is about someone else. Before you conclude that your situation is different or more complex. Sit with one number. 60%. That is the percentage of Americans who say they plan to work past 65 not because they want to, but because they believe they have no other option. 3 out of every 5 people. Sitting in parking lots. Having a conversation with themselves that they cannot finish. Wondering how the mathematics of their life ended up here. This audio is not about retirement planning in the conventional sense. This is not about maximizing your contributions or optimizing your withdrawal rate. Those things matter. But they are not the reason most people work until they break. The reason most people work until they break is not financial. It is psychological. It is the story they were given at 22 about what a life well lived looks like. And the story was wrong. Chapter 1. The Architecture of the Trap. When you were approximately 22 years old, someone handed you a story. They did not announce it as a story. They presented it as a sequence of rational steps. A logical progression from where you were to where you were supposed to go. It went something like this. Get a degree. Get a job. Work hard for several decades. Save what you can. Retire at 65. Enjoy the final chapter. Simple. Clean. Widely endorsed. Here is what no one told you about that story. It was written by people who needed you to believe it. Not through conspiracy. Not through malice. Through the perfectly natural tendency of any system to reproduce itself by persuading the people inside it that the system is the only reasonable option. The trap has 4 walls. The first wall is called time displacement. Time displacement is the belief that the meaningful part of your life comes after the obligation part. You work now so you can live later. You sacrifice now so you can enjoy later. You delay now so you can have later. This belief is so deeply embedded in the standard life script that most people have never examined it directly. But examine it for just a moment. You are told to defer living. For 30 to 40 years. And during those 30 to 40 years, the following things happen. Your body changes. The physical experiences that were available to you at 40 are not available at 70. Your parents age and then die. The relationships that form the emotional infrastructure of your early life do not pause while you are deferring. Your children grow up. The version of your children who needed you and wanted you does not wait. And the version of yourself, the younger one, with the energy and the hunger and the specific kind of openness that only exists before the weight of years accumulates, that version does not pause either. Time displacement asks you to trade what is irreplaceable for what is merely valuable. And most people accept that trade without ever being shown the full terms. The second wall is called threshold confusion. Threshold confusion is the systematic misunderstanding of how much money is actually enough. The financial services industry has a specific interest in your uncertainty about what enough looks like. Uncertain people buy more products. Uncertain people stay in accumulation mode longer. The research is robust and has been replicated across cultures. Beyond a specific threshold, more money does not produce more happiness. For most American households, that threshold sits somewhere between $75,000 and $125,000 per year. Above that threshold, additional income produces essentially no meaningful improvement in daily emotional experience. Threshold confusion makes you feel like you never have quite enough. Like the number that would allow you to stop is always just slightly ahead of where you are. The threshold keeps moving because the threshold was never meant to be a destination. It was meant to be a horizon. A feature of the map that keeps you walking. The third wall is called identity fusion. Identity fusion is the process by which your sense of who you are becomes inseparable from what you do for income. When you meet someone new, within 60 seconds of the introduction, you will be asked, "What do you do?" Not, "Who are you?" What do you do? And if you have spent 20 years answering that question with a specific title, a specific company, a specific role, something happens to your sense of self that is very difficult to reverse. You stop experiencing your work as something you perform. You start experiencing it as something you are. And the moment you are your work, the idea of stopping your work becomes the idea of stopping yourself. Identity fusion does not just keep you working past 58. It makes the idea of not working feel like annihilation. The fourth wall is called social proof paralysis. Social proof paralysis is the mechanism by which even people who intellectually understand the trap remain inside it. Because everyone they know is inside it. And the act of leaving requires not just a financial decision but a social one. It requires the willingness to be different. To be early. To be, in the eyes of some people who matter to you, irresponsible. The man in the parking lot knows, on some level, that he does not have to be there. He knows that the mathematics, if arranged differently, could permit him to leave. But the people around him are still there. And leaving before them would require him to explain himself. These four walls. Time displacement. Threshold confusion. Identity fusion. Social proof paralysis. They are not financial walls. They are psychological walls. And no amount of financial planning defeats a psychological wall. You defeat a psychological wall by seeing it clearly. Chapter 2. The Sovereign Financial Framework. I want to be precise about something. The principles in this chapter are not shortcuts. They are a framework. A way of thinking about the relationship between money, time, and autonomy that produces different decisions than the standard model. The framework is called sovereign capital. Sovereign capital is not a number. It is a condition. The condition of having accumulated enough financial resources that your continued participation in paid employment is entirely voluntary. Not comfortable. Not secure. Voluntary. The distinction matters enormously. The goal of the standard financial planning model is security. Security says, I have enough that I will not run out. Sovereignty says, I have enough that the decision of whether to continue is entirely mine. Security is defensive. Sovereignty is offensive. The sovereign capital architecture has 3 pillars. Pillar 1 is the sufficiency calculation. Instead of starting with your current expenses and projecting forward, you start by asking a different question. What does a life I actually want to live cost? Not the life you are currently living, which was largely designed by the circumstances of your career and the neighborhood you can afford and the status signals you feel obligated to maintain. The life you actually want. For most people, when they do this exercise honestly, the number is smaller than their current expenses. Significantly smaller. Because most of what people currently spend is not in service of what they actually value. It is in service of the story. The car that signals success. The house that justifies the commute. The vacations that provide relief from the thing that is causing the need for relief. When you strip the story away and ask what a genuinely good life actually costs, for most households in the United States the answer is somewhere between $40,000 and $70,000 per year. At a 4% annual withdrawal rate, $40,000 per year requires a portfolio of $1 million. $70,000 requires $1.75 million. These are not small numbers. But they are not the 3 to 5 million that many people carry in their heads as the vague threshold for security. And when you combine the sufficiency calculation with a genuine audit of what you actually value, those numbers become more achievable than the standard model suggests. Pillar 2 is the time-money inversion. The standard model treats time and money as opposites. You trade time for money. You accumulate money so you can eventually buy back time. The time-money inversion is the recognition that this relationship can be restructured at any point. Not just at the end. The most powerful lever available to most people in their 40s and 50s is not investment return. It is the restructuring of the time-money relationship. Specifically, the shift from selling all of your available time at a fixed rate to selling a portion of your time at a premium rate. This is the logic behind consulting, contract work, part-time arrangements with high-value employers. The person who reduces their working hours by 40% and reduces their income by 20% has just experienced a fundamental shift in their relationship to time. They have not retired. They have begun the transition. Pillar 3 is the legacy architecture. The legacy architecture is the intentional construction of a life that generates value independently of your continued direct participation. This can take financial form. Investments that appreciate. Businesses that operate without your daily involvement. Real estate that produces income. But it also takes non-financial forms. Knowledge systems. Written work. Communities. Relationships with younger people who carry something of you forward. When you shift your primary orientation from consuming what you earn to building something that endures, your relationship to both time and money changes fundamentally. Work becomes less about income and more about construction. And the horizon begins to resolve into something more like a destination. Chapter 3. The Psychology of Sovereign Transition. Let us talk about the real obstacle. Not the financial one. The psychological one. Here is what happens to the majority of people who intellectually understand the trap, who have done the sufficiency calculation, who can see the time-money inversion clearly, who know with reasonable certainty that they have enough. They do not leave. They keep working. Not because they have to. Because they cannot figure out how to stop. The psychology of sovereign transition has three distinct challenges. Challenge 1 is the Identity Reconstruction Problem. When you have spent 2 or 3 decades answering the question of who you are with a professional title, the removal of that title does not leave you with the self that existed before it. That earlier self has been largely overwritten. What remains, initially, is a sense of vacancy. A feeling that is difficult to describe to people who have not experienced it. It is closer to the feeling of standing in a room where the furniture has been removed. You can see the outlines of where things used to be. The impressions in the carpet. But the room is not yet anything. The identity reconstruction problem is not resolved by deciding to leave work. It is resolved by actively building the replacement identity before you leave. You cannot successfully transition away from a professional identity unless you have a non-professional identity that is already load-bearing. A load-bearing identity is one that provides structure, meaning, community, progress, recognition. It does not need to provide income. But it needs to provide those other things. And building a load-bearing alternative identity takes time. In most cases, 2 to 4 years of deliberate construction. Which means the work of rebuilding your identity needs to start not at the moment of transition, but years before it. Challenge 2 is the permission problem. The permission problem is the internal experience of waiting for an authority to release you. It sounds juvenile when stated directly. But it is nearly universal. People wait for their financial advisor to tell them they have enough. They wait for their doctor to tell them their health requires it. They wait for their company to tell them they are no longer needed. They are waiting for permission. The resolution to the permission problem is not finding the right external signal. The resolution is the recognition that no external signal is coming. The permission you are waiting for can only be self-issued. And the most common form of the permission problem is not the inability to find the right moment. It is the habitual deferral of the moment to a future in which the permission will somehow feel less audacious. It will not. The moment will always feel audacious. That is not a signal that you are not ready. That is a signal that you are doing something real. Challenge 3 is the significance equation. For most people, the feeling of significance, the sense that they matter, has been generated primarily by their professional activity. They matter to clients. They matter to colleagues. They matter to the organization. They are significant because they produce something that other people need. When you contemplate removing yourself from that structure, you confront a question you may have been successfully avoiding for 20 years. If I am not producing this, am I still significant? And for many people, the answer that comes back is an uncertain one. And uncertain is close enough to know that many people do not risk the experiment. The resolution to the significance equation is the recognition that significance generated by function is borrowed significance. You did not create it. The role created it. And significance that you did not create cannot sustain you when the role ends. The work of sovereign transition is the work of constructing significance that belongs to you. Generated by the work of being fully, deliberately, irreplaceably yourself. Chapter 4. The 5 types who stop before 58. Let me introduce you to 5 people. These are composites. But they represent real patterns. Real architectures of life that enabled something the standard model says is either impossible or irresponsible. The first type is the early optimizer. The early optimizer encountered these ideas in their late 20s or early 30s and made specific decisions based on them. They kept their fixed costs dramatically lower than their income justified. They invested the difference consistently. And they never allowed lifestyle inflation to consume the gap between what they earned and what they needed. The early optimizer's lesson: the most powerful financial variable is not return on investment. It is the gap between income and expenditure, maintained over time. The second type is the strategic pivot. The strategic pivot spent their 30s in the standard model. Corporate career. Accumulating lifestyle. In their early to mid-40s, something shifted. Sometimes it was the death of a parent, or a health scare, or a conversation at a funeral. Sometimes it was simply a Tuesday afternoon when the weight of the next 15 years of Tuesdays became briefly, unbearably visible. The strategic pivot reduced their total expenses by 30 to 40%. They restructured their work, moving from full employment to consulting or contract arrangements. And they began treating the accumulation of sovereign capital as their primary professional objective. The third type is the builder. The builder spent their working years constructing something outside their primary employment. A business. A portfolio of rental properties. A body of intellectual work that generates income independently. The builder built in the margins. Early mornings. Late evenings. Weekends. Not frenetically. Persistently. Over years. Until the thing they built was generating enough that the thing they were employed to do became optional. The builder's lesson is not about entrepreneurship. It is about the time horizon of construction. Most things worth building take longer than 2 years. The people who stop trying because the thing has not worked in 2 years never find out what happens in year 5. The fourth type is the partner architect. The partner architect understood early that the most impactful financial decision of their life was not an investment strategy. It was the choice of life partner. Two people with aligned values and aligned financial approaches, operating as a genuine unit, can achieve sovereign capital in a timeframe that either individual alone could not. The partner architect is strategic about alignment. About having explicit, uncomfortable, recurring conversations with their partner about what both people actually want. What does a good life look like to you? What does enough feel like? At what point does the accumulation of more start to cost more than it provides? These conversations are not natural. They require a kind of relational honesty that many couples never develop. But the couples who develop it arrive at shared clarity about their destination. The fifth type is the conscious inheritor. The conscious inheritor did not optimize early. Did not build a side business. Does not have a high-income partner. What they have is a specific relationship with accumulated advantage. Not necessarily financial inheritance. Sometimes the advantage was a professional credential that provides high-value consulting work. Sometimes a network cultivated over decades. Sometimes a skill set that, when repackaged, generates income in ways the original employer never utilized. The conscious inheritor's lesson is about inventory. Most people have accumulated more than they recognize. Skills. Knowledge. Networks. Credibility. And most people dramatically undervalue what they have because they are too close to it to see it clearly. Chapter 5. The Practical Architecture. Practice 1, the Annual Sovereignty Audit. Once per year, on a day you choose, you conduct a sovereignty audit that answers 4 questions. First, What does my actual life cost, stripped of everything I spend on the story rather than the substance? Second, what is the gap between my current sovereign capital and my sufficiency number? Third, what one change, if implemented today, would most accelerate the closing of that gap? Fourth, what did I do last year toward the identity reconstruction I need to complete before I can successfully transition? That fourth question is the one most people skip. It is also the one that matters most. Practice 2, the constraint inversion. Take your current most significant financial constraint. The mortgage. The car payment. The school tuition. Whatever it is. Now ask, what would be possible in my life if this constraint did not exist? This exercise is a diagnostic. The strength of your response tells you something important about whether your current financial architecture is aligned with what you actually want. Practice 3, the 12-month identity experiment. For the next 12 months, dedicate between 3 and 8 hours each week to activities that are not connected to your current professional identity. Not hobbies in the passive sense. Active construction. Writing. Building. Teaching. Creating. Something that, if it were your primary activity, would constitute the identity you want to inhabit after the transition. Practice 4, the sufficiency conversation. Schedule, in the next 30 days, a conversation with your life partner about what enough looks like to each of you. Most couples have never explicitly answered this question. They have implicitly agreed to keep accumulating, keep optimizing, keep moving toward a horizon that neither of them has precisely defined. The sufficiency conversation makes the horizon visible. And once it is visible, it becomes a destination. Practice 5, the exit rehearsal. Once, in the next 6 months, take a month of leave from your primary employment. Use it to live, as closely as possible, the life you intend to live after the transition. The exit rehearsal produces direct evidence of whether the life you have been designing in your head is one you actually want to inhabit. Most people who do it discover one of two things. Either the life is better than they imagined, and the rehearsal becomes a powerful argument for accelerating the transition. Or the life reveals gaps they had not anticipated, giving them specific information about what to build before the permanent transition. Either outcome is more valuable than another year of planning. Interlude. The numbers no one shows you. Before we move to the final chapter, I want to give you something concrete. A set of numbers. Not to overwhelm you. Not to substitute for a qualified financial advisor who knows your specific situation. But to anchor the framework in reality in a way that the principles alone cannot. These are illustrative scenarios. They are not predictions. They are not guarantees. They are evidence that the path is shorter than you think. Scenario 1. The late starter who acts at 50. This person has saved reasonably but not aggressively. At 50, they have a combined retirement portfolio of $350,000. They own a home with equity of $220,000. They are earning $95,000 per year in a corporate job they find tolerable but not meaningful. They do the sufficiency calculation and determine that a life organized around what they actually want costs $52,000 per year. At the current portfolio value, a 4% withdrawal would generate $14,000 per year. Not enough. But here is the math over the next 8 years, if they make 3 specific changes. First, they reduce their current spending by 22% by eliminating the category of expenses that are in service of the story rather than the substance. Second, They increased their annual savings rate from 9% to 24%, which is now possible because of the spending reduction. Third, they use 3 hours per week, not 20, 3 hours per week, to develop a consulting service based on their existing professional expertise. By year 3, this generates $18,000 per year. By year 6, $31,000. At 58, 8 years later, their portfolio has grown to $780,000. The consulting income is $31,000 per year. Combined withdrawal plus consulting income, $62,000 per year. Sufficiency number, 52,000. They are 12,000 above sufficiency. 8 years after deciding to begin. This is not magic. This is arithmetic applied to a different set of assumptions than the standard model uses. Scenario 2. The couple who aligns at 45. 2 people, each earning combined household income of $160,000. They have been living, as most couples at this income level do, at or above their means. 2 car payments. A mortgage on a house slightly larger than they need. Private school for 2 children. Vacations that look good in photographs. At 45, they have the sufficiency conversation. They discover that the life they actually want, rather than the life they have been performing, costs $80,000 per year. They have saved $210,000. Not enough. But they make one structural change that changes everything. They sell the house. They move to a smaller house in a less expensive neighborhood. The equity from the original house adds $240,000 to their portfolio. Their monthly housing cost drops by $1,100 per month. Their children transition to excellent public schools, which their children handle, as children generally do, better than the parents expect. Over the next 8 years, the household savings rate increases from 7% to 31%. At 53, they have a combined portfolio of $860,000. The husband has transitioned to part-time consulting at 50. The wife continues working in her field but at 30 hours per week instead of 55. Total income from portfolio plus part-time work at 53, $92,000 per year. Sufficiency number, 80,000. They are not retired. They are sovereign. Scenario 3. The solo builder at 42. A single person. No partner. No family wealth. Earning $72,000 per year. Has saved, carefully, $140,000 over 20 years. At 42, they begin allocating 12 hours per week to building a body of digital educational content based on their professional expertise. They are a nurse. They create a practical course for people managing elderly parents' care. A subject they know in extraordinary depth and about which there is enormous unmet demand. Year 1, the course generates $4,000 in revenue. Year 2, $11,000. Year 3, $28,000. Year 4, $49,000. At 46, the course and related content are generating $49,000 per year with approximately 8 hours of weekly maintenance. Combined with a reduced nursing schedule at 30 hours per week, generating $38,000 per year, total income is $87,000. Her sufficiency number, 44,000. She is not working past 58. She stopped having to at 46. These 3 scenarios are not exceptional. They do not require extraordinary talent or unusual luck. They require clarity, alignment, and the willingness to begin. Chapter 6. The conversation you need to have with yourself. Everything in the previous 5 chapters is preparatory. But none of it matters until you have the conversation that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The conversation is not with your financial advisor. It is not with your spouse. It is not with your children or your colleagues or the voice in your head that sounds like whoever handed you the story in the first place. The conversation is with yourself. Specifically, with the part of yourself that knows the difference between the life you are living and the life you intended to live when you still had enough distance from it to see it clearly. That part exists in everyone. It exists in the man in the parking lot. It exists in you. It went quiet not because it stopped having anything to say, but because you got very good at not listening. Because listening is dangerous. Because the voice, when you actually hear it, makes demands. It says, this arrangement is not acceptable. It says, the terms you agreed to at 22 no longer reflect what you understand at 50. It says, there are things you intended to do, experience, build, become, that are still possible, but not for much longer, and not if you keep choosing the parking lot over the possibility. The conversation has 3 questions. The first question is, what do I actually want? Not what do I think I should want. Not what would be responsible to want. Not what would be impressive to people whose opinions I weight too heavily. What do I actually want? This question is harder than it appears. Because most people have spent so long performing what they are supposed to want that they have genuinely lost access to what they actually want. Wanting more than what you have been told you should want is not ingratitude. It is integrity. It is the refusal to pretend that the story you were given is sufficient when something in you knows it is not. The second question is, what has living someone else's story cost me? Not in an accusatory sense. In an accounting sense. What specifically, concretely, verifiably, has the acceptance of the standard story cost you? Time. Attention. The specific version of yourself that might have emerged if you had arranged your choices differently. This accounting is not comfortable. But it is necessary. Because the people who skip this question are the ones who remain in the parking lot. They cannot fully commit to change because they have not yet fully acknowledged what the current arrangement has cost. The cost, seen clearly, is the motivation that no vision board and no productivity system can provide. The third question is, what am I willing to do about it? Not what am I going to do? Not what is the plan? What am I willing to do? Willing acknowledges that what is required involves difficulty. That it requires saying things that are uncomfortable to people who matter to you. That it requires tolerating uncertainty about whether the life on the other side of the transition is as good as you imagine it to be. That it requires, possibly for the first time in your adult life, choosing yourself over the performance of yourself that the story requires. This is the question that separates the people who understand the trap from the people who leave it. Understanding is easy. Leaving requires the decision, made at a level below intellect, below rationalization, that the life you are currently trading is worth less than the life that is still possible. And that the only thing standing between those 2 lives is the willingness to begin. The man in the parking lot, revisited. I want to return to the man in the parking lot. The one who was 61 years old. Who sat for 4 minutes before going inside. I want to tell you what happened to him. He had the conversation with himself. It took approximately 6 months of uncomfortable circling before he arrived at anything resembling clarity. He did the sufficiency calculation and discovered that his actual sufficiency number was 40% lower than he had been assuming. He had a conversation with his wife that they had never had in 31 years of marriage. He found out that she wanted something different from what she had been performing just as much as he did. He started building, in the hours before work, the thing he had been meaning to build for 11 years. Within 18 months, that thing was generating enough income to matter. Within 3 years, it was generating enough income that the placard on the desk became genuinely optional. He did not stop working. He stopped working for other people's reasons. He started working for his own. And on a morning approximately 4 years after that parking lot, he woke up without an alarm, made coffee, walked to the desk in the room he had converted from a storage space into a workspace, and sat down to do the thing that mattered to him. And there was no parking lot. I want to say something directly to you now. Not to a composite. Not to a character in a story. To you. You are, in all likelihood, more capable of this than you currently believe. Not because I am offering hollow encouragement, but because the belief that this is not available to you is itself a product of the trap. The trap needs you to feel that sovereignty is for other people. Luckier people. More talented people. People who made different choices at 22. It tells you that you are too late. That the compounding opportunity has passed. That the gap between where you are and where you would need to be is too large to cross in the time remaining. These are the trap's most sophisticated arguments. And like every sophisticated argument in service of a wrong conclusion, they contain enough truth to be convincing and enough distortion to be dangerous. Yes, starting earlier is better. This is not in dispute. But starting now is categorically better than not starting. A 60-year-old who makes 3 deliberate changes, starting today, will be in a fundamentally different position at 68 than the 60-year-old who makes no changes. Not because of investment returns. Because of the compounding of better decisions over time. And the 52-year-old who begins today has a runway of genuine significance. The 45-year-old who begins today has a runway that, if used deliberately, can produce complete sovereignty within a decade. The 38-year-old who begins today is in a position that most financial advisors would describe as excellent, if the decisions from this point forward are aligned with what we have discussed. None of these people are too late. They are, however, at risk of becoming late. And the thing that makes people late is not the absence of time. It is the habit of beginning tomorrow. Tomorrow when the situation is clearer. Tomorrow when the children are older. Tomorrow when the mortgage is smaller. Tomorrow when the timing feels better. Tomorrow is the most expensive word in any language. Because tomorrow has a cost that compounds invisibly. The cost of the days that pass while you are preparing to begin. The cost of the version of yourself that does not get built because the construction was deferred. The cost of the alternative life that becomes, year by year, slightly less available. These costs do not appear on any statement. But they are real. And they are, in most cases, far larger than any financial cost you have been avoiding by staying in the parking lot. This is what is available to you. Not guaranteed. Not without difficulty. Not without the conversations that are uncomfortable and the decisions that require genuine courage. But available. The architecture exists. The evidence exists. The scenarios are real. The only remaining variable is you. Not your income. Not your current savings rate. Not the choices you made at 22. You. The person listening to this right now. The person who has been sitting with this material for 50 minutes and knows, somewhere below the level of intellect and rationalization and the very sophisticated machinery of self-protection, that something in it is true. That something in it is describing, not someone else's situation, but yours. What are you willing to do about it? Not someday. Now.